Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to our Thursday night Anamkara meditation program. And with all my heart, with all my love, I welcome you to our program this evening. So thank you for coming. And especially because you're individuals who are committed to practice and living the fruit of practice, the knowledge of your highest nature, the boundless love, the boundless compassion, the joy, the wisdom, the equanimity, living that into the world moment by moment through the power of practices, but most importantly, because it's your true nature. And the practices just bring us home to the recognition of that. And so to be in the company of seekers as yourself who embody that, really that drive to know, the longing that is written about in so many different ways that drives us to really want to know the infinite, to know the divine, know God, whatever we might be calling that, to know that fully and then walk it into the world. So thank you for coming and bringing the power of your practices this evening and the power of your presence. So we're going to be starting in a few moments with the opening mantras. And the opening mantras are a way of invoking our highest nature and helping the mind to kind of step back and get free of all the things that have occupied it today, this week, whenever, that can be in the way of our perceiving the fullness of who and what we are and the divine nature of all beings in the moment. Because that sublime nature is always present, but it's our involvement with the mind that gets in the way. So the opening mantras are a way of helping the mind to step back, let go, come home to the truth of who you are, come home to your sublime nature, your true self. So we'll start with the opening mantras. Mata Kalim Devi Ki Jaya Gajananam Bhutanganari Sevitam Kapita Jambo Palacharu Vakshanam Umasukam Shokam Vinashakarakam Namami Vigneshwara Parapankajam Shri Ganeshaya Namaha Shri Ganeshaya Namaha Shri Ganeshaya Namaha Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamandaya Purnamevavashishate Om Shanti 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 Shri Mata Kalim Devi Ki Jai. So once again, with all my heart and with all my love, I welcome you to our program tonight. That stillness, that the gift of mantra unfolds, it's in that stillness that we can really directly know the truth of who we are, the truth of the sublime nature of all beings, all creation, free of the mind for that time. But even as the mind is moving and thoughts are arising, the stillness and the silence helps to illumine what is it that illuminates those thoughts. What is it that allows us to be aware of the sensations in the body, the thoughts cruising through the mind, emotions, memories, things arising and subsiding. There's this luminous quality of awareness that illuminates the content of mind. And it's the habit of being identified with content that binds us. But that luminous awareness, that's always present and always free. That's our true nature. Right? It encompasses all that the mind is, all that the body is, all that the experience of the world is, and it transcends it. There's an infinitude of being that we're invited to know, in addition to knowing our finite self, the limitations of mind, body, roles that we play, all those things. And tonight we're going to be getting into a foundational text from Kashmir Shaivism, as we did last week. Because last week we were talking about the Shiva Sutras and some of the sutras related to this unfolding of consciousness and the power of that consciousness, Chit Shakti. That's also Shakti Kundalini, the power of consciousness that undoes that sense of being bound and limited. Well, in the Kashmir Shaivite tradition, there's another foundational text, and it's known as the Pratyabhijnahrdayam. I particularly like this copy, this translation by Jaideva Singh. And it's a text that dates back over 1,000 years, back to about the 8th, 9th century. And the great sage Kshemaraja, who wrote the Pratyabhijnahrdayam, was a student of the great Kashmir Shaivite master Abhinavagupta. Abhinavagupta Acharya, just to give you a sense of this lineage, Abhinavagupta was the one who found the Shiva Sutras inscribed on a rock in Kashmir. And so the Shaivite tradition that grew out of that has gotten to be known as Kashmir Shaivism. And it's a Advaita Kashmir Shaivism. It's a non-dual. So like Advaita Vedanta is non-dual Vedanta, this is a non-dual school. Meaning that it reflects the foundational truth that all is one. All is one. All is Shiva. All is that. Entering that awareness brings the fullness of that experience, the boundless rapturous joy, the love, the ecstasy, the wisdom, the knowledge, the freedom, right? And so the practices that come out of that are all aimed at bringing us back to the truth of who we already are. And that's in the title of the Pratyabhijnahrdayam. It's known as the secret doctrine, the heart of self-recognition. The heart of self-recognition. So that coming to know the truth of who we are isn't we're creating that self. We're remembering. We're recognizing. We're recognizing what's already there. It already fills our nature. It already is the substratum of everything about our body, our mind, everything. It's coming to know that is the aim of the practices, but even more importantly, again, practices sort of attract the mind because the mind is a doer. What do I do? Give me something to do. What do I do when I sit there? Wait a minute, am I not doing anything? What do I do? I better think. That's the nature of the mind, so off it goes. The heart of this tradition is what we were also talking about last week, Kundalini Shakti. Kundalini Shakti is the power of consciousness that transforms and reveals, the power of transformation and revelation. It reveals the truth of who we are, already are, fully, completely. It's also known as Anugraha, the grace-bestowing power of the infinite. Right? because it's the power that undoes the impediment of being identified with limitation, the mind and body, the vehicle that consciousness has created to know this domain. So when we go into these texts, it's a way of also helping to deepen our understanding. They're, just as we've mentioned in the past, in the old Zen saying, the finger, don't confuse the finger with the moon. These texts and these words and these concepts are related to that. And so we have to be able to understand that, they're not revealing so much the truth on its most fundamental level. They're helping the mind to come closer to knowing. But the mind is a limited instrument, and so its knowing is going to be limited. It's when we go beyond the mind, when we go into that, that's where the fullness of it unfolds and is directly knowable. So the Pratyabhijnahrdayam, we're just going to get into really the first sutra, because this is the, in the cycle of programs, this second week of the month, we're usually doing a reading and contemplation. And so following up on the Shiva Sutras last week, we're going to go into some of the Pratyabhijnahrdayam as a way of, again, deepening our understanding and what all is rooted in even a simple practice like mantra, like Om Namah Shivaya. The simple practice of turning our attention to the witness, the seer who's never seen. In meditation, we keep shifting away from the ordinary mind to the one who's illuminating that. Well, that is all rooted in this profound understanding that itself came from the direct realization of the great sages and saints, and they've passed that on all the way down to this current day, so that it becomes our living experience as we unfold that and receive the gifts of grace of Kundalini Shakti. So the Pratyabhijnahrdayam starts like this: Om, adoration to the one who is the very embodiment of bliss and auspiciousness. That's Shiva. That's your true nature. Shiva means the auspicious one. Adoration to Shiva, who eternally brings about the 5 processes, who makes manifest the highest reality, which is at the same time the highest nature, his self, which is the real self of each individual. And that is a mass of consciousness and bliss. So remember last week when we were talking about the first sutra from the Shiva Sutra, same thing. The nature of the self is pure consciousness. The nature of that consciousness is consciousness and bliss, unbounded. And when they're talking about those 5 processes, that's a way of understanding that this the extraordinary Shiva Shakti, power and consciousness, are continually doing these, what the mind would perceive as these 5 processes. And the 5 processes are creating, sustaining, dissolving, concealing, and revealing. That those processes, that the Shakti, Chit Shakti, the power of consciousness that is the nature of Shiva, are continuously unfolding, both on the cosmic level of the creation and the sustaining and the dissolution of the entire universe, but even when we look at the mind creates a thought, it sustains the thought, it then dissolves the thought, or it might conceal it, tuck it away in your memory, it might reveal it again and bring it back. So it's said that throughout all of creation, from the infinite auspicious one down to us as an individual, we'll always see these 5 processes going on, because it's all Shiva. It's all the nature of that infinite one, even in a finite form as the mind. It's a way, again, of being able to see that our highest nature pervades all of reality, all of our reality. So Kshemaraj goes on and says, out of the great ocean of the doctrine of recognition, which is the quintessence of the secret doctrine concerning Shankara, Shiva, is brought out the cream, the essential part, by Kshema Raja, in order to nullify the poison of samsara, the ongoing ignorance. He writes, in this world there are some devoted people who are undeveloped in reflection and have not taken pains in studying difficult works like logic and dialectics, but who nevertheless aspire after that state of enlightenment with the highest Lord Shiva, which blossoms forth in the descent of Shakti. For their sake, the truth of the teaching of Ishwara Pratyabhijnahrdayam is being explained briefly. So the Pratyabhijnahrdayam was based on an earlier text, Ishwara Pratyabhijnahrdayam. In order to explain the universal causality of the divinity that is the self of all, its attainability by easy means and the high reward, it is said that the absolute Chitti, this power of consciousness of its own free will, is the cause of the manifestation of the whole universe. And that is the first sutra. So going back a little bit, when he's talking about that the knowledge of the highest self, Shiva, blossoms forth with the descent of Shakti. Descent of Shakti in this tradition is a term called Shaktipat. Shaktipat means the descent of Shakti. Shakti is the power of consciousness. So it's that consciousness that is known as the grace to cut through what Shiva or Chit Shakti already created. It created bondage and limitation. It created the sense of, I'm just this little being. I'm just this little mind and body. It wasn't just the mind that created that, so it's not going to be the mind that can dissolve that. The mind is the outcome of that creation. So the very root of that ignorance, in order for it to be cut, it has to be cut by the one who created it, Shakti. So Shaktipat is that descent of grace that cuts through that root ignorance that keeps us from knowing the truth and the fullness of who we are. So Shaktipat is, and with that awakening, what it's talking about is awakening of Kundalini Shakti, this power of consciousness to know the infinite as ourself. This power that transforms the mind and body so that now there are vehicles that consciously participate in knowing the infinite even while experiencing what it is to be finite. That's called living samadhi. That kind of sahaja samadhi isn't just a state confined to being still and quiet in body and mind. It's a state that illumines everything as the dance of our own self, the dance of our own being. That's what's unfolding with thoughts, with feelings, with actions, everything. So that level of consciousness, returning to what's the eternal one, Sadashiva, the eternal auspicious one, that is what unfolds as a result of the awakening of Kundalini. That's why it was seen as the esoteric goal of all the different forms of yoga, hatha yoga, mantra yoga, laya yoga, raja yoga, the classic forms of yoga, in a sense, had as their goal the awakening of this power, because it's the one that can do that final work of eliminating that impediment that has us confusing ourselves to be this mind and body rather than the infinite. Kshema Raja goes on saying, of the universe, this means of Sadashiva, the eternal Shiva, all the way down to the earth. In the matter of Siddhi, means that full power. It means in effectuation, in other words, in bringing about the manifestation or the continued existence and resting in its highest experience, in bringing about all this, the highest Shakti, the divine consciousness, the power which is absolute and of free will, consists in this highest illumination, this highest flowering, and is non-distinct from Shiva itself. So Shiva and Shakti aren't two things. This is a thing we run into all the time with the poor mind. The mind thinks in discrete categories. It is an instrument for dividing and separating, doing that, compare and contrast. It's this or it's that. So that's why even when we talk about what's the fullness, the nature of the fullness of that consciousness, we wind up with several words. Buddha would call it the four immeasurables: the immeasurable joy, the immeasurable wisdom, the immeasurable compassion, the unbounded equanimity. In yoga we call it Sat-Chit Ananda, the eternally true, the pure consciousness, Chit, that dances in this ecstatic, loving embrace of all that is. The mind is what needs different syllables, different words. This is all one. These are inseparable qualities. So it's not like we have to try and, how do you put those together to get one? That's the mind that does that. And to perceive the unity of that, we have to leave behind the mind. We have to let go of the mind. We have to let it become so quiet and at rest that it doesn't interfere. Until we become really established in that knowing. And then even if the mind jumps up and starts running around, we just go, oh yeah, that's myself as mind. It's doing its thing, it's getting caught there, it's playing dangerously over there, better come back, mind, better reel it in. We establish a different relationship to the mind when it's being illumined. We're being informed by our highest nature, the truth of what we are. So Kshemaraja goes on, it is only when Chitti, this ultimate consciousness and power, comes into play that the universe comes forth into being. And it continues in its existence. And when it withdraws its movement, the universe also disappears from view. So Shakti is both the creator, the sustainer, and can dissolve it. That's the infinite one. And when it withdraws its movement, it's the movement of Shakti that's creating all this, the universe also disappears from view. One's own experience would bear witness to this fact. And other things, for instance, Maya and Prakriti, these are other terms for the power that then becomes these limited forms. Since they are supposed to be different from the light of consciousness, can never be the cause of anything, literally anywhere or anything. For not being able to appear owing to their difference from consciousness power, they are as good as non-existent. But if they appear, they become one with that light of consciousness. Hence Chit, Shakti, which is that light alone, which is the cause. Never is the other one, these other objects, any cause. Therefore space, time, form, which have been brought into being, are vitalized by it, by Chit Shakti, and not being capable of penetrating its real nature because it is all-pervading, eternal, ever risen, and completely full. This is to be understood by the import of this sutra. So in other words, the ordinary mind as a vehicle is the product of this limiting factor, Maya Shakti. And as a product, it is not able to grasp, to know, to even produce the light of consciousness which gives birth to it all. So again, it's a way of saying it's all in its root, this play of this supreme energy, Chit Shakti, inseparable from Shiva, that is taking on all these different forms and giving it various qualities. For the mind, it gives it also the quality of limited consciousness. But that mind is not the cause of the infinite. The finite can't give birth to the infinite. The infinite is what can give birth to the finite. So knowing ourselves as the infinite again, we have a completely different view of what it is to be finite and inhabit the limitations of body and mind. Kshemaraja goes on, it is the divine consciousness alone, Jaideva Bhagavati, Jaideva, the divine consciousness, Bhagavati, the great goddess, right? We came across that again as a term in the Bhagavati Mahaprajna Paramita Hridaya. The Heart Sutra is known as the great goddess as well. She who gives birth to all Buddhas. Well, it's this consciousness that gives birth to everything. Buddhas and limited forms, bound forms, all. This luminous, absolute, and free-willed as it is, which flashes forth in innumerable worlds, this is what is meant by the causal relation here. It is used in its highest sense, since this consciousness alone is the cause of the manifestation of the universe, which consists of subjects or knowers and objects of knowing, and the process of knowing. Therefore, poor means of proof, by whose main function is to bring light to new objects, is neither fit nor qualified to prove this ultimate consciousness. In other words, the ordinary mind. Again, trying to dispel the idea that the ordinary mind, and the mind is often compelled, it's trying to grasp, it's trying to hold, it's trying to take a hold of, I'm going to know this, I'm going to illuminate this with the light of the mind. But that's akin to trying to illuminate the sun with a little flashlight. It's absurd. But if you thought you were the flashlight, you might think you could do something like that. That's what happens when we think with the mind and we feel compelled to do what we do with the ordinary objects of the world. We try to grasp them with the mind, understand them with the mind, and in the ordinary domain of knowing, it works pretty well. But in this domain, it's useless. It's useless. It's only going to bring all its limitations to that, and it will never illuminate that which is its source. Shamaraja goes on to say, just as when one tries to jump over the shadow of one's head with one's own foot, the head will never be at the place of one's foot. In other words, you can't jump over your own shadow, right? And that's what it's the mind trying to get free of the impediment that prevents it from knowing the infinite is like that. It's like one trying to jump over one's own shadow. It's not possible. We have to go beyond that. We have to leave that domain entirely. Now, since this pure consciousness is the cause of the universe, as well as of limited experience, which consists in bringing it about, and its identity with its highest non-dual consciousness, therefore it is called Swatantriya. Swatantra. Swatantra means free will. Swatantriya Shakti is the power of unimpeded will. That again is the root of who we are. That consciousness is unimpeded. There are no obstacles to it. There's nothing that can bind it. It creates the illusion of bondage to know what it is to sense limitation. And then, when it's time to let that go, that's Shaktipat. That's the descent of grace. That's Anugraha, that power of grace that then cuts through that illusion of just being bound and identified with mind and body, the roles we play, the dramas our life has included. So letting that go is what the work of the Shakti is about, cutting through that, freeing us. Its free will being recognized, it becomes the cause of the full attainment. In other words, both experience of limitation as well as of liberation, and from the freedom from the bondage of limited experience. So this is the import of understanding that all of what's coming out of this play of Chit Shakti, of its own free will, creating the universe within herself as herself, within Shiva as Shiva. These are non-dual. That gives that experience. Then, when it's time for that revelation to happen, that's the awakening. That's the descent of Shakti that we talk about as Kundalini awakening in Shaktipat. Kshamaraja writes, the consciousness of object and subject is common to all embodied ones. The yogins, however, have this distinction. They are mindful of this relationship, the relationship between the infinite and the objects of perception. In that way, the object is always related to that infinite subject. Without this relationship to the subject, there is no such thing as an object. The yogi is always conscious of that witnessing awareness from which the subject arises and which it finally comes to rest. So the practices are aimed in this way at bringing us home to the direct knowing of who are we as that consciousness that's illuminating our experience moment by moment. That seer who's never seen, right? That seer who illuminates the experience of the waking state, that illuminates the dreams that arise in the dream state, that illuminates the black void of the deep sleep state, and then is fully known in its true nature when we go beyond those three states and enter the state of Turiya, the state of pure consciousness that is the nature of our highest being. Right? Unbounded, luminous, and in that luminous self, we can know both the comings and goings, the arising and subsiding, the arising, the sustaining, and the dissolving, the concealing and the revealing, the whole play of those five powers on a cosmic level and on an individual level. So that's what we're really talking about. So even last week when we were talking in the Shiva Sutras and also talking about Patanjali's Yoga Sutras about the consciousness that illuminates all three ordinary states, this is that consciousness that is our highest nature. And coming to know that and understand it. So the mind isn't going to know it, but it can start to have, through an understanding of, for instance, the Pratyabhijnahrdayam or the Shiva Sutras or commentaries on it, it can begin to have enough of an understanding that it can go, oh, that's what unfolds when we become quieter again. That's what unfolds when we start to look past the content of the mind. The mind is so addicted to compulsively engaging in the content, thoughts, feelings, memories, fantasies about the future, all those different things, that we have to convince it in a way. And part of this is understanding, oh mind, you will have access to unbounded joy. You'll have access to boundless consciousness, this rapturous, blissful awareness. You're already in that. Let go of the idea that I am separate from that. Come home to I am that. That's the root of this awareness. Hamsa, I am that. Shivo'ham, I am Shiva. I am the auspicious one. Even as I sit and I'm meditating and the mind is doing its dance, I can see the play of Shiva Shakti. I can see thoughts arising, sustained for a while, dissolving, hidden away, and then revealed again. That process, that play is going on all levels, all the time, and can serve then as a reminder, wait a minute, you're the boundless one doing that. You're the infinite one. You're not caught in this particular thought form, this particular feeling, this particular perception. You have a choice. You're swatantriya. You have unimpeded free will. That's always been yours. Not the mind. It's not the mind's. The mind has limited will. It's a mere reflection of that. Coming home to the self is coming home to that boundless freedom of agency, of wisdom, of knowing, of loving, of compassion. So that's what unfolds. Even while we see, the mind has its limitations. The limitations of mind don't go away. The limitations of body don't suddenly disappear. Consciousness is what we awaken to, that's the boundless living presence of the infinite one. Shiva, Shakti, our highest nature. Coming home to that, we rest in that. Coming home to that, our life is illuminated by that. Now, when the mind and body are being illuminated by that, then it transforms them, because it reveals how much of what we do in our ordinary sense of individuality is a reflection of that ignorance, of not knowing the fullness of who we are. When we don't know the fullness of who we are, we have a great sense of lack, of want, of need, that can be desperate at times. It's a reflection of that limited sense of being. The true freedom from that doesn't come from trying to fill all the desires that arise, trying to fill that hole, trying to fill all those lacks and wants and needs. We could consume the planet. We could consume the solar system. We could consume galaxies and never fill that hole, because that hole is a hole of ignorance. It's coming home to the truth of who we are that fills us with the light of being, pure presence, pure divinity, so that we then see that around us. Then we can see, yes, the body has certain needs, and we take care of that. The mind has certain much more limited needs that are dharmic, and we can fulfill those. And now we can also have this instrument be at the service of our highest nature, rather than at the service of scurrying around trying to fill all those lacks and wants and needs that are born of ignorance. Become full, and now, out of that fullness, all one wants to do is give. We see that Buddha, upon realizing, becoming awake. Buddha means awake. Awake to what? His infinitude. All he wanted to do was live, and live compassion, kindness, loving presence into the world. The same with sages and saints across traditions. When illuminated by the fullness of that living presence of the divine within us, what could we possibly want or need? What good is this vehicle? It's not living in service of that love, that compassion, that embrace of all. So that's what becomes the motive force. Not being driven by lacks and wants and needs that don't exist except out of ignorance. Such a radical shift. That's what it means to shift into this radical freedom. Right? That's why the path of Kundalini awakening is the path of radical freedom. It's the path of anugraha, the path of grace. It's the path of this descent of grace, Shaktipat. It's the unfolding of the truth of who we are, that we can then live into all aspects of our lives with a freedom and an openness of heart that embraces all. That's what we're given as humans. What an extraordinary thing. This is why the texts across different traditions celebrate what it is to finally have a human birth. That we're in a form that can truly know that in all its fullness and serve it by walking that wisdom into the world, into the compassionate, loving, generous embrace of all. That's what we're called on if we want to realize the truth of our humanity in its fullness. Because our humanity in its fullness goes all the way to the infinite and back, all the way to the divine, as well as the divine in limited form. All the divine always has been, whether in its boundless nature or its finite nature, always just the one, all one, all one. Shivo'ham, Shivo'ham, all is one, all is one. All is Shiva, all is Shakti, all is consciousness. We're empowered to know that. So the understanding that Kundalini Shakti is inherent to every being. We all have that consciousness, to know that in its fullness, already present from our moment of inception. This life has held that potentiality. And that's what Carl Jung was referring to when he wrote that, when you succeed in awakening Kundalini from its mere potentiality, you enter an entirely different world, a world of eternity. That eternal existence is the nature of the highest, not bounded even by time and space. Then, to live informed by that transforms everything. To know that, then we take refuge in Shakti practice that is empowered by this power of consciousness. And that's the importance of Shakti mantras, of Chaitanya mantra, of empowered mantra. So Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya. Ancient power of this lineage that it has both the power to awaken that Shakti and sustain its unfolding. It's a mantra that's already residing and vibrating within. But we can become attuned to it through chant, through meditation, through silently repeating it until we become fully aware that there it is. It's already vibrating. It's there. It's the fullness of our being. So the ancient rishis first heard it, deep in meditation. So it serves as a vehicle for awakening us to that level of freedom and consciousness, unbounded consciousness. So we're going to chant the Maha Mantra, the great mantra, Om Namah Shivaya, for a few minutes, and then just rest in the stillness. Om Namah Shivaya. Yes, it means I bow to the auspicious one. I bow to the infinite, my own self. So it's done with the awareness of Shivo'ham, of I am that. I am the auspicious one. That's all that is. And whether we're chanting it aloud and holding that awareness, sitting silently and holding that awareness, until the mantra dissolves that sound form or that thought form, and then all there is the throb of the awareness. I am that. I am that. I am all that is. All that is. No words. I'm sorry I have to give it words. Beyond words. Come to rest in that. You've come to rest in yourself. In yourself. It's all held in loving embrace. Om Namah Shivaya. Om Namah Shivaya. So we'll chant now for a few minutes and then sit in the stillness of our own self. Shrimati Kalima Devi Ki Jai. Om Namah Shivaya. Shiva. So we end with this prayer. And may all our practices truly benefit everyone. And may all beings know complete freedom from suffering. Namaste. Shiva, Shiva. Om Namah Shivaya. Om Namah Shivaya. The rapturous eye awareness is so alluring. That's part of what draws us as we start to get a taste of that, to go beyond the mind. And then we discover that every time we draw near that, it's what one of the things that Kshemaraja points out in the Pratyabhijnahrdayam is that awareness is inseparable from the rapture, its ecstatic nature. So it's sometimes seen as Shiva is this witness of detached presence, right? But inseparable is Shakti. Inseparable is that ecstatic presence that is Shiva, is Shakti. They're irreducible qualities. So that's why sometimes as we're drawing near to that, the mind and the body get flooded by that. Just the rapture, the ecstatic nature of our own true self. Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya. Shiva, Shiva, Shiva. What have I to offer but tears? Tears of love. We come home to that. And that's the gift of the unfolding of our highest nature. That's spoken about as this power of consciousness we call Kundalini. But it's the power of consciousness, the power of the infinite to know its unbounded fullness, the fullness of love, the fullness of wisdom, the fullness of grace, the fullness of joy, the fullness of compassion. All simultaneously there, present, as your own self, your own being. Come home to that, and then let it flood your awareness. Let it illuminate your life. Walk it into the world, whether you're at work or at home, in relationship, whatever it might be. It's all there, all the time. Only one, only one. Shivo'ham, Shivo'ham. So I want to thank you for coming and bringing the power of your practices, the power of your Shiva Shakti nature, your living, sublime, divine nature. It has never been diminished. It's never been reduced. We have the illusion of being bound to the mind and the body. But just the other side of that illusion is the truth, the living presence of who you are and who all beings are and all creation. Nothing left out. No one, nothing left out. The divine embrace holds it all. Come to know that. That is your birthright. So thank you for coming and bringing the fullness of your sublime self to this evening. And with all my heart and with all my love, I look forward to seeing you next week.